Night gathers over a kingdom that no map can hold, and somewhere between parchment and prayer, a ring glints in the mind, small enough for a finger, yet vast enough to shackle storms. A circle said to bear the ineffable name and the geometry of command over things that hide in corners of wind and stone. And they call it the Ring of Solomon, because names need anchors when stories sail too far. The tale begins as a whisper in temple courts and desert tents alike, with a king who asks for wisdom and receives a tool instead, a signet that turns knowledge into authority, where words alone would fail. In the oldest accounts tucked between scripture and rumor, the ring descends as a gift from an angel, a seal impressed not in wax, but in air. Its design a cipher that demons read as law and jinn hear as thunder softened by mercy, the difference between tyranny and stewardship, blurred by the distance of centuries and the hush of reverence that follows a legend down a corridor. With it, the Builder King calls labor from the invisible, and foundations rise at night as if the earth had agreed to do its part in a pact that left no parchment behind. The Testament of Solomon, a text that survives like a fragment of a longer dream, charts a courtroom where the accused speak in confessions shaped like cosmology, each spirit announcing its vice and its remedy while the ring flickers as gavel and leash, a theater of names where catalog becomes architecture, and the architecture in turn encodes a cosmos. Between the lines, the stone of the first temple seems to breathe, and the softer truth is this: the ring is a story about order coaxed from chaos, and that is always a story worth telling twice. What shape the seal bore depends on who remembers it. Some say hexagram, some pentagram, some a script so old it writes the wind instead of letters, and each version promises a map, not to treasure, but to obedience and authority we fear and crave, in equal measure, when dark corners rustle and our lamps run low. A geometry's less a drawing than a vow, and vows tend to outlast the hands that made them when they touch the right appetite. The work the ring commands is patient and heavy. Stones cut without iron, timbers moved without rope, waters diverted as if they owed back taxes to a crown stamped in light. And each night the workforce vanishes with the stars, leaving precise joints and whispering fissures that mortar cannot silence. In the morning, there is only dust on sandals, and a suspicion that the boundary between miracle and engineering is not where we left it yesterday. From the east, another current joins the stream. In Arabic, Suleiman governs not only people, but winds and the jinn help lay courses and carve quarries. The sea itself, answering to a sign slipped onto a royal finger that is rumored to be made of brass or gold, or a mixture that learns the name of hardness from its purpose. They build palaces that ripple like mirages on days too hot for patience, and they pull metals from mountains as if singing to oars everyone else had forgotten by name. But stories do not stay obedient. They sharpen their own edges, and so comes the chapter where a jealous spirit named Asif or Asmodeus does not break the ring, but borrows it by deceit, casting its owner to the edge of his own city unloved and unrecognized, while the usurper sits his throne until luck changes shape and a fish returns what the river keeps for only the worthy. In this reversal lies the moral nobody wishes to eat. Control is a meal that spoils without gratitude, and the ring's obedience is to the name, not to the finger. Elsewhere, a fisherman hauls up a clay jar, sealed with leads stamped by a monarch he will never meet. And when the seal cracks, the air turns strange, as if a century had been kept inside on ice. And a column of smoke recites a formal oath about service that curdles into fury when freedom tastes fresh. And then the jar is sealed again with a mark the sea respects more than storms. Every port claims a version of this story, and every version ends with a caution that floats as stubbornly as wood after rain. Kabbalists, collectors, and kings all bend over the same small circle as if it were a well-seeing in its polished face, whatever they are thirsty for. A taxonomy of hidden powers, a ledger of debts owed by spirits to saints, a shortcut through the hard mathematics of patience and the hush around. It is the same hush that attends libraries at night. Some say the ring speaks to metals, others to directions, others to the appetites inside us that refuse to be arranged by daylight alone. The ring today sits at the crossroads of symbol and conspiracy, a waypoint used by secret orders to decorate oaths and by storytellers to open doors into rooms where normal air cannot settle. And the questions it leaves are more fragrant than the answers it promises on stamps and banners that never admit how they were drawn. Somewhere between museum cases and midnight is a circle no curator can catalog, and to approach it is to feel the lamp grow warm in a hand that will need to hold it longer than planned. What matters is not proof, but the space proof leaves behind. The way a sealed story invites the knife of curiosity to work around its edges until a clean opening appears. And through that cut, we will descend like careful thieves into vaults of parchment, brass, and rumor looking for a ring that perhaps never was, and yet keeps turning events as if the world itself were a finger that prefers to be adorned. The ring wanders through centuries, the way an unmoored star wanders through charts, accumulating languages as barnacles in each coast adds a glaze of respect and a pinch of fear, baking the myth into a bread that tastes of home, no matter who eats it at dusk. In rabbinic tales, a seal inscribed with the name gives jurisdiction over spirits whose contracts must be notarized by angels. While in folk stories around cooking fires, the ring becomes a key kept on a hook that nobody should touch when the wind is wrong. Islamic memory sets the ring in a court where birds and beasts attend with genuine interest, a parliament whose minutes read like a poem and whose law is harmony. And the same ring orders the winds to bear a throne on air with no creak, which is either allegory or technology, mistaken for prayer. And both interpretations are committed to wonder. In these tellings, the ring is not just control but balance, a governor that keeps the world from choking on its own appetite when power forgets to pace itself. Ethiopian tradition threads the ring through the visit of a queen whose riddles traveled faster than her servants' meeting at which the floor itself is said to have become a mirror to test truth from costume. And in the stretch of that reflection, some versions place the ring as a token in a lineage that will crown different continents. When the Nile remembers who braided it a chain of sovereignty, whose links are the color of sunrise over Aksum. Legends respect geography, like rivers respect gravity, and the ring's path is a map beneath maps. In the Greek and Syriac fringes of old cities, the ring resembles the talismans worn by exorcists who collect syllables like keys and carry medals like passwords and a surviving gem carved with a rider spearing a demon whispers that craft and myth share. A workshop one stocked with molds, mineral dust, and small confident hammers. If the ring began as a signet, then every seal pressed into wax is a cousin, and cousins make for crowded gatherings when families tell long stories. A pattern emerges. The ring sits at the exact intersection of legality and magic, making contracts enforceable, not by force, but by an acknowledgement of hierarchy written into the world's grain. And though skeptics rename the hierarchy as physics, the sensation remains that some rules can be, if not suspended, then negotiated by a bearer who knows the vowels that hold storms together. Perhaps this is why scribes squared their letters and magi squared their circles, each hoping for an angle of approach the other had missed by a thickness of gold leaf. When the builders of kingdoms need labor beyond taxes, the ring hires it. When kings fear betrayal, the ring tests it. When scholars fear their own hearts in the dark, the ring promises a hierarchy that will put interior wolves on a stipend. And that last contract is perhaps the most seductive because nobody pays on time, and grace is a currency that avoids ledgers. These jobs are written into lore as if they were entries in a daybook, and monuments sometimes look like receipts when the light falls just right. Every symbol that survives long enough must learn to diversify, and so the seal alternates between hexagram and pentagram across, centuries to the point where masons carve one and alchemists the other, each declaring their version to be the true signature of a wisdom that plays favorites only with those who listen hard. And in the indecision, there is a kind of proof that the ring is not a drawing, but a story about drawing borders. The border between summoning and stewardship is where most of the myth lives, and borders attract customs officials, even in fiction. Some claim the ring was not forged, but descended, which confers a different authority, since metallurgy can be copied, but a gift from above resists forged theft, and so legends keep the alloy vague while making the inscription precise, an inversion that suggests the message matters more than the messenger's hardware. If the inscription is the name, then the ring is a frame for a sound, and sounds carry farther than metal when the night is clear. Where is it now? The story asks with comfortable regularity, and vaults volunteer in whispers. Beneath the pavement of a contested mount, under a church whose stones know more languages than its choir, in the custody of an order that learned silence as its first sacrament, or at the bottom of a river that forgets less than it forgives, each option a ladder for a dreamer to climb when sleep gives permission. The rumor that something is hidden is itself a kind of hiding, and the ring's best protection may be the litter of lesser tales thrown over it, like leaves in autumn. As centuries turned, Europe learned the ring in Latin, and that language's appetite for order born of law turned the myth into manuals stamped with royal names they could never have earned. Manuscripts that promised pentacles like circuit diagrams and spirits like bureaucrats with titles that fit poorly in margins. And with that, the legend crossed a line between campfire and study desk. The change of furniture altered little of the hunger beneath, and this hunger will escort us softly into rooms where candles lean and quills scratch like cautious mice. If this circle could be traced, it would draw us from desert courts to cloistered scriptoria, from whispered invocations to elaborate sigils, and from oral caution to inked ambition, where scholars daubed paint into diagrams in hopes of coaxing obedience from forces they prefer to answer only to the name. In a room that smells of vellum and charcoal, a hand copies a book it will never claim to have written, a key of a king who lived before the alphabet of the scribe's mother, and the text speaks with patient authority about days and hours, planets and metals, angels and seals, a choreography that promises not spectacle but leverage, and leverage is the polite cousin of control. The ring in these pages becomes template rather than jewel, a pattern any steady apprentice might lay on the world if his courage outpaces his fear. The key of Solomon travels in dozens of manuscripts like a pilgrim with many faces. Italian here, French there, Greek in a corner with marginalia that sweats suspicion, and everywhere the diagrams repeat with the fidelity of snowflakes that still somehow claim uniqueness, circles bordered by holy names, crosses of geometric certainty, characters that look like runes taught manners by Latin tutors. It is less a book than a workshop manual borrowed from a neighbor 2 doors down and copied by candlelight until the copy believes itself original. Soon a companion arrives with a firmer jawline. The lesser key organizes spirits into a roster that resembles an army tempered by the manners of a court. 72 names given titles and seals that look like labyrinths and signatures at once. And though the text warns of dangers, it also purrs with competence, a tone that invites the unwary to mistake literacy for authority. Here the ring is a dynasty of circles chalked on floors and drawn on parchment. And in the act of drawing, a drafter become actor in a play begun 1,000 years before the ink dried. Yet other rooms keep different clocks. In Prague and Mortlake, tables fill with scrying stones and brass instruments, and a mathematician learns to listen for voices. His age is not ready to classify, while his associate writes fast enough to catch a language down stepping into letters that nobody else will read for centuries, and still the ghost of Solomon is credited in whispers, because credit and blame are coins that never sleep. The ring, whether worn or imagined, is the abstraction that makes command palatable to conscience when the voice in the dark insists on titles. Temples change shape as empires learn new columns, and so the ring hides in guilds that value compasses and levels, allegorizing itself as virtue, while diagrams cling to lecture slides dressed as morality. and by then the seal has become a star on banners and a charm above doors. More defense than offense, more ward than leash. A metamorphosis that suggests a culture deciding to domesticate its appetite for mastery. The geometry moves from the king's finger to the mason's tools, and what had bound spirits now anchors ethics in instruction delivered in whispers. But manuscripts retain their appetite, and they wander through auctions and private cabinets like tame beasts that remember forests in their sleep, and each owner is sure that he will be the one to find the footnote that reveals a method lost to absent-minded monks, though his descendants will inherit only a book smell and a rumor sweet, enough to eat with fruit at night. The ring, as perpetual promise, funds a small economy of hope that keeps libraries warm through winters. There are darker corridors where whispers sharpen, and here the ring appears in the mouths of inquisitors who needed reasons in depositions, where shaky names and shaky seals became the rope that justifies itself, and in caricatures that pass for evidence when fear writes captions for woodcuts that should have lived quiet lives as ornaments. The moral is tedious, and therefore important. Power that declares itself divine must be watched, and the ring is as much a warning about seduction as a celebration of control dressed as benevolence. Still, the diagrams beckon with clean lines, and scholars today study them without burning incense, extracting from their geometry a history of belief that reveals a different kind of ring, one made of questions chained together, each linked tight to the next, forming a circle that turns smoothly when pushed by curiosity. The seals are at once art and artifact, and an honest gaze sees not devils on call, but minds trying to find levers under stars that did not move for prayers as often as those prayers expected. The question asks itself again, did a real ring ever exist? And if so, where would it have gone? And if not, why do so many diverse streets hum the same tune when winter deepens and jobs go strange? And why does the idea of lawful rule over unruly things throb like a practical dream in the temple of the skull? The silence answers by showing us a signet used to stamp taxes, a ring used to name, a king, a band given to mark a marriage, each with a tiny authority that widens when crowds agree to share a story. Beyond Europe, manuscripts in Arabic write Solomonic methods with a pragmatism that refuses guilt, weaving astrology with invocations that taste of older desserts, listing houses of the moon, and tables of letters that frame a philosophy of sympathetic ties. And while modern readers flinch at certain recipes, the core remains familiar. Order the unseen as you order a household, and remember that neglect invites entropy like a guest who never leaves. In that house, the ring hangs near the door, which is exactly where a threshold should advertise its rule. In this maze, the ring no longer needs metal to exist. It survives in the gesture of drawing a boundary, the naming of a fear, the willingness to learn the grammar of storms before speaking to them, and whether or not any demon ever obeyed a human. Command the discipline required to make the attempt was itself a kind of lesson that built temples equally in stone and in conduct. Archaeology, that careful marriage of patience and exactitude, cannot produce a ring of power on demand, but it can produce rings, and these lie under glass in cool rooms. Carnelian intaglios with kings and lions, gold bands with inscriptions that speak of owners, not of elements, and a few gems incised with figures binding small things under horses, hooves that smell of Hellenistic comforts rather than biblical thunderstorms. Each object is modest and human-sized, and that modesty is the quiet rebuttal that legends must learn to live beside. Walk old stones in Jerusalem and hexagrams stare back from lintels unbothered by later quibbles, a motif as practical as a knot in carpentry, and as elegant as a star that cannot choose to be less than symmetrical, used by Mamluk craftsmen on fountains, and by Kabbalists on amulets appropriated and reappropriated until the symbol cares more about continuity than about any single owner's claims. Symbols migrate like birds, and the ringed seal rides these wings until borders become embarrassments to ornithology. The pentagram, too, has centuries under its belt, protective in Greek doorways, mathematical in Pythagorean notebooks, Marian in medieval hymns, and later renegotiated into a script that would make Solomon blink and poets nod. And in its journey, the shape learned to carry whatever luggage the age handed it with the grace of a porter who prefers silence to theater. A ring bearing either figure would tell a story to whoever needed to hear it. And that is how talismans work when their charge is memory. A curiosity fused to the legend, like a mineral inclusion, is the shamir, a worm or stone able to cut the hardest rock without metal, the device by which forbidden tools are avoided, while permitted miracles are permitted, a loop that lets law keep its letters without breaking its spirit, by breaking stone too noisily. And in this we glimpse an older technology, whose credit line includes patient knowledge of pressure and heat, trades that demons could teach if angels allowed guest lecturers. Whether the shamir was biology, geology, or allegory, it bore the same moral. Obedience with ingenuity is the craft of ruling. What would the ring be made of if it were to survive? And metallurgists answer with alloys that do not panic in sweat, nor tarnish in time. Gold for memory, brass for defiance, iron for caution, and perhaps a setting of onyx to drink light instead of reflecting it. Because some names prefer quiet architecture to display, and all of this is fancy dressed as hypothesis to remind us that artifacts are biographies with mineral ink. An inscription would need to be shallow enough not to catch on cloth, and deep enough not to fade in the heat of bargaining with winds. Modern conspiracies recruit the ring without needing its permission, placing it under the Temple Mount as bait for restless excavation, or in the vaults of empires that built their reputations on inventory and sealed doors, or in the hands of an order that swore to break empires by outlasting them, and though no photograph can deliver proof, the imagination likes corridors lined with tile and anonymous lighting, where a small box waits like a throat clearing before a confession. If secrets have a preferred room temperature, it is the temperature of storerooms, which is to say cool. Digging under old cities brings up jars, boa, beams, and sometimes tunnels that chase one another as if they were playing games set by centuries. And in these finds, each blank leads to a story that asks to be fed again by midnight. And the ring is the easiest dish to cook for such hunger, using the same recipe of longing and plausible coordinates. A ring that orders spirits would be a logical prize for anyone ordering armies. And logic is the mask hope wears when it wishes to meet us at the museum without blushing. Meanwhile, scholars trace the ring's paperwork across manuscripts, like detectives who only arrest adjectives, mapping the genealogy of seals, comparing scripts, noting when an angel's name swaps vowels as it crosses a mountain range, and they discover not a conspiracy, but a conversation. A centuries-long peer review conducted by candlelight that decides by habit what is safe to hand to apprentices and what is better left as a riddle. The ring shows best as a footnote to a caution, and footnotes are the polite form of secrets. Beyond texts and stones is craft, and jewelers in Fez and Istanbul still set silver with stars and names, not to command, but to ward, a humble cousin of the ring designed to keep small nights from widening into halls, and the palm that wears it minds its business more quietly. For it, as if a story had agreed to do a day's work, for anyone polite enough to address it properly. Such pieces are not relics, but participants in a tradition that prefers the soft law of habit to the hard law of edict. If the ring were found, would it function? And if it functioned, would we call it magic or a voice-activated treaty with aspects of the world that recorded their preferences before we learned to pronounce ours? And if it did nothing, would its silence be any less potent as symbol in an age that worships buttons, even when they are disconnected? The question is less about outcome than about custody. What kind of hand deserves to test such a thing? And what kind of heart can bear the result? A rumor curls at the edge. A sealed brass vessel dragged from a harbor trench during wartime, dredging the seal unphotographed. The contents logged as silt, and dismissed the foreman retiring early, for reasons no one but his wife would guess, and somewhere in a drawer A lead cap sleeps under invoices, the impression on its face obscured by oxidation that would lift if someone cared for 10 minutes on a weekday afternoon. The drawer remains shut, and curiosity eats its own tail with gratitude. The ring, as a story, has chosen endurance over evidence, preferring to be the exact size of a question that fits any age's finger. And in that choice, it has become a teacher of patience disguised as a promise of power. And that disguise has fooled more emperors than it has priests, which may be the final joke, carved into a bezel that no acid can dissolve. Modernity carries old hunger in new pockets, and the ring empties them with the elegance of a pickpocket who returns what he stole as a lesson. Because control remains the flavor we crave when the night stays up late and devices hum like reassuring bees. And somewhere in that hum, the notion returns. If someone somewhere had a circle that could speak to storms, who would they be? And what would they be asking the storms to do for breakfast? The question is less about belief than about desire, and desire is a compass that finds its own north. Intelligence agencies in the fantasies that help civilians file their wonder would want the ring for the same reason kings did, not to break laws of physics, but to negotiate more favorable terms with the angry portions of reality, the parts that burn, blow, and bite without caring about elections. And so rumors assign the circle to vaults that also hold maps with corners removed, and devices that appear on homicide television in glimpses designed to look accidental. Even if nothing like the ring exists in these rooms, the architecture remembers to leave space for it in the plan. Elsewhere, antiquarians arrange their lives around findable things, and among those things is correspondence that hints at a purchase never consummated, a signet that looked promising in a catalog from Cairo in 1907. The librarian's pencil leaving an exclamation point in the margin that the next owner missed. And this is how artifacts elude capture, hiding in the timing between two intentions that never met, a gap into which legend fits like smoke into a bottle's throat. The ring thrives in these gaps. Writing paper trails the way athletes ride thermals. Out on the water, fishermen still tell a tale about a jar refusing to open until a prayer was spoken properly. And although the jar turned out to be filled with nothing but disappointed light and the smell of tin, the story insists that something had been coaxed into behaving like patience, which is itself a minor miracle on hard days. And the listeners nod, because patience is a coin that buys time in any market. The ring, in that telling, is a teacher of timing rather than a scepter for sudden acts. Museums display seals and rings under glass, with labels that prefer dates to adjectives. And in storerooms beyond the elegance of gallery light lie trays of unloved metal awaiting a graduate student's attention. And it is tempting to write a ficus green ring into one of those drawers, waiting for a late Friday's quiet to lift it into the world again, only to find it is a wedding band from a house no longer standing, whose own story changes the air in the room more honestly than any miracle would. The enchantment of the ordinary is the background chorus to every epic. Meanwhile, psychologists note that the ring appeals because it splits us in two, the part that wishes to command, and the part that longs to be commanded wisely, the tyrant and the apprentice cohabiting in a single chest that wants the weather inside to behave as well as the weather outside never will. And so the legend feeds both halves without demanding a vote, which is a relief after a day of decisions that pay in small coins of fatigue. The myth is a permission slip to imagine integrity and power, and that relief is medicinal, even when imaginary. When belief grows careless, the ring reminds us of its stern addendum. Misuse invites reversal, and the fish that swallows a jewel returns it only to prove that identity is not guaranteed by ornament. A lesson that breathes comfortably beside empires that mistook uniforms for souls and titles for truths. And in this, the ring is tender as a warning and accurate as a ledger balanced by a clerk with a memory for faces. Power returns when the hand learns humility, which is an education that costs what it must. So the circle persists as song and symbol, glimmering on talismans that intend only to guard. Sleep and steady luck, crawling through literature, as a footpath between realism and reverence, and sometimes appearing in the corner of a painting as a small oiled halo, worn where halos belong. When a culture decides saints are easier to love if they can also sign documents. Each appearance suggests availability, and that suggestion keeps curiosity fed without dehydrating it with certainty. Imagine, for a last quiet moment, a storied ring lying in the dark of a place whose air tastes of limestone and candle smoke. Its surface cool, its inscription shallow and confident, doing nothing at all, and thus doing what symbols do best. Waiting for a mind to complete it with breath, a hand to complete it with touch, a story to complete it with purpose. And in that waiting, you can hear the gentle precision of a world that prefers questions framed carefully over answers lobbed quickly. Perhaps control is only ever the art of asking in the right geometry, and perhaps the ring was never a tool, but a mirror held up to the idea of rule. Before you drift into sleep, remember mystery is never truly lost, only waiting to be found. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe for more relaxing ancient mysteries, and let your curiosity guide you deeper.